friends, welcome back. Since we are discussing about the different aspects of interactive behavior and previously we discussed about Johari window and its application in understanding human relationships or interpersonal relationships. Today I will discuss about the another aspect of interactive behavior, that is transactional analysis. This is one of the most talked about topic in recent times in group behavior or in the area of organizational behavior, which is very much applicable to understand interpersonal relationships and help in enhancing communications among group members. So, if I talk about this concept of transaction analysis, this was first coined by Eric Berne in the year 1950s, and his approach was phenomenological in the sense that this concept was a study of the structures of experience and consciousness. Now, here experiences, as the term implies, that when a person is interacting with the different types of groups or members of different types of groups and have lot of work experiences or daily life experiences, and how he is mixing those or matching his experiences with his consciousness or the current pattern of behavior, then the communication pattern also varies from person to person and from moment to moment. So, this is the philosophical study of the structures of experiences and consciousness of an individual. So, transaction analysis is the study of personality, or it is a theory of personality and a systematic psychotherapy for personal growth and change. So, with what consciousness we interact or communicate with the other person will define the relationship between two people. So, if we are saying that it is a theory of personality, then actually according to Eric Berne, the person functions with his inner state of mind, that how or in what state the person is interacting or communicating with the other person and how it is impacting the long term effect on the human relationship or interpersonal relationship. At the same time, it is also a systematic psychotherapy for personal growth and change. As the term implies, that psychotherapy is the study of mental health or mental illness based on certain therapies or mechanisms which can help a person to overcome his deviant behaviors or distressful behaviors. So, according to International Transactional Analysis Association, transactional analysis is a theory of personality. That means a mask that a person wears and how with that mask a person communicates with the other person while defining his interpersonal relationship, and a systematic psychotherapy for personal growth and change. That means to what extent the person is able to overcome the deviant behaviors, the dysfunctional behaviors and distressing behaviors. So, the basic idea about transaction analysis or TA is that initially personality was the main aspect that was considered to understand human relationships, but later on Eric Berne identified that how different patterns of communication can not only identify or underline the internal psychological dynamics, that means with which aspect or with which pattern of behavior or mood the person is interacting with the other person, but actually it is more than that. It is the study of the dynamics that contains in a people's interaction. That means with what intention we are interacting with the other person will define the relationship and the communication and the outcome of the communication between two people. So, basically TA shifted the attention from internal psychological dynamics to the dynamics contained in people's interactions. So, TA or transaction analysis comprises of some aspects or units of behavioral patterns. Now, here if I say the aspects or units of behavioral patterns, that means it has certain components which when combined all together will define the interaction between two people and the interpersonal relationship. So, the first component of transaction analysis is the transactions. Now, here the transaction means social interaction. Social interaction can be analyzed to determine the personal dynamics or the psychological dynamics of the interaction. Now, here we have to get into the detail of the transactions. The transactions are analyzed to determine the ego state of the communicator, that means with which level of consciousness the person is communicating. So, this communication or level of communication can be in three forms, that means either the person is communicating with his parent like ego state, or it can be a child like, or it can be adult like ego state, which helps to understand one's and the other person's behavior. Now, here when Eric Berne has used this term to determine the ego state of the communicator, that means it is the consciousness whether the person is communicating impulsively, or the person is communicating while basing his communication or units of communication in terms of verbal or non-verbal communication based on facts or reality based, or it is completely based on the principles or notions that with what idea and principles the person is trying to communicate or send the message to the other person. So, these are the ego states of an individual with which an individual communicates. Now, here when I am talking about the ego states, actually Eric Berne has extended this a theory of personality given by Sigmund Freud. Now, Sigmund Freud has identified human behavior in terms of ego states or consciousness, and this consciousness has three aspects. It is the id, the ego and the superego. So, according to Freud and according to Berne, which is the outgrowth of the Freudian concepts of id, ego and superego, id is something very much impulsive and which stimulates or triggers a person to respond in a specific manner. In a specific manner here means that whatever reaction comes to your mind and we try to exhibit the same. Our disposition is very much impulsive. I am angry and I can be verbally abusive, or I can physically attack the other person if I am angry. The other aspect of human consciousness according to Freud is ego, which actually monitors that if a person is angry, then he is controlling, monitoring his anger, that to what extent he is trying not to exhibit his anger onto the other person. So, this is ego, that the person is actually trying to be very objective while understanding the whole situation, the whole environment, and then giving a response. So, this is ego, you are monitoring your behavior, and the other is superego, which is completely based on principles, that you are controlling your behavior based on principles and logics. We are finding logic and reality in every aspect of the situation. So, these are the three aspects which Freud has given to human consciousness or mind, that is id, ego and superego. Now, these ego states has been extended by Eric Berne at three levels, that is here the parent ego state, the adult ego state and the child ego state, and these ego states are something which are very much shaped by childhood experiences, that whatever experience we have during our childhood, it has long term impact on an individual's personality, which is reflected in every communication. So, this is the idea that when Eric Berne has outgrown the Freudian concept of personality in terms of id, ego and superego to adult, parent and child ego state, then actually Eric Berne is focusing on the childhood experiences that an individual has and how it is reflected in different patterns of communication. So, if I talk about parent ego state, then this state is the result of messages that people receive from their parents and elder people in their lives. So, whatever learning we have from our parents or elderly people or siblings or experiences, that actually helps to develop parent ego state, which comprises of the judgmental, rule making and moralizing component of personality, where whenever we are interacting with other people, then we are either operating with those principles that we have received or messages we have received during our childhood experiences. So, we will reflect those kind of behavioral pattern in terms of parent ego state, and it is expressed by advice, do's and don'ts. That means the moralizing component, that this is right, this is wrong, I should not do this or you should not do that. So, this is the parent ego state, which is very much developed during our childhood experiences. The other ego state is the adult ego state. This ego state is the authentic and reality based ego state, where we are just talking about the objective reality. Whatever facts we have, we try to interpret those facts in a very rational and logical manner, and we try to find facts in that situation, and we try to solve problem based on the solutions available in that particular situation. So, this is adult ego state. It is directed towards the objective appraisal of reality, that whatever is the situation, we are trying to monitor and control accordingly. So, whatever solution we can propose, it is actually based on interpreting the current situation. So, this is the adult ego state, and the other is child ego state. This ego state is actually very much triggered. It is impulsive and at the same time it is creative, that we are not giving a thought that what can be the outcome of that interaction, and we are impulsively responding to that environment or to the person in a communication. So, this child ego state constitutes the emotional, creative, spontaneous and impulsive component of personality. So, according to Byrne, personality is composed of 3 ego states: parent, adult and child. So, he has proposed a pack model: parent, adult and child ego states, which comprises human personality, and this personality based on these 3 ego states are actually reflecting in different patterns of communication. This is the first component of transaction analysis, that is the ego states, which is largely shaped by childhood experiences. Next is transaction. Now, transaction is actually a unit of communication, that when we are communicating with the other person, then what kind of communication is taking place between two people. That means, with what ego states is dominant in that particular communication, that identifies transaction. So, transaction is between individuals on the current state of each person, and according to Byrne, these interpersonal interactions are actually the transactions based on ego states and are used by label games, which refer to certain patterns of transactions which popped up repeatedly in everyday life in every human interaction. That means, Eric Byrne has identified the ego states as games in the communication, that with which ego state we are communicating in a particular situation. So, this is a transaction. So, transaction is game based. So, communication is what is a transaction where we are conveying the message or transacting the message to the other person, and the games are the ego states with which we function or with which we communicate with the other person. So, transaction is the basic unit of social interaction, and it consists of the exchange of words, messages and behavior between two people. What vocabulary, whether aggressive or very subtle vocabulary, we are using in communicating, and what kind of behavioral pattern we are exhibiting or disposing while interacting in that transaction, that is a transaction, and it identifies the ego states that both the initiator and the respondent exhibit in the transaction. That means, how I am giving a response to the other person and in what manner I am receiving the message from the other person will actually define the transaction, because in that transaction two ego states are functioning, mine and the other person. That means, the initiator and the respondent, they both are functioning at their own ego state level, and that ego state is the gameplay. So, that will define that what kind of transaction has taken place, which reveals the current ego state of an individual. This is the one aspect. So, based on these transactions, Eric Byrne has talked about 4 kinds of transactions: complementary, crossed, ulterior and the Gallows transaction. So, these are 3 transactions which are very much popular when we are talking about transaction analysis in workplaces or in any social situation where the transaction is operational, the games are also operational and the ego states are also operational. So, if we talk about complementary transaction, so it is the best transaction that can happen in any communication or or in any communication. So, that means when communication continues along the parallel lines between individuals, then the transactions are complementary. For example, the manager would ask the supervisor that how many products you have assembled right now. That means the manager is transacting or communicating with the adult ego state, and the respondent will also function at the adult ego state while responding that till now I have assembled 100 units till now. So, that means the transaction between two people is complementary and parallel. Parallel here means that two people, the manager and the supervisor, are functioning or playing the game at adult ego state. They are complementing each other. Sometimes what happens that maybe the initiator is operating at the adult ego state, but maybe the respondent is operating at the child ego state. But if the initiator who is functioning at the adult ego state can also maintain his position at adult ego state and transform the respondent's communication at the adult ego state as well. For example, if a wife is taking care of her husband's health, the wife would say that it is time for you to take your medicine right now. Husband would say, who is very much ill, that I will not take this medicine because it is bitter in taste. So, wife is functioning at the adult ego state and the husband is functioning at the child ego state. Now, if the wife maintains her adult ego state, then with the continued communication, the wife can also transform the husband's child ego state to adult ego state while stating that I will give you the medicine and later on you can have some sugar, it will enhance your taste, and the husband agrees. So, while wife maintaining the adult ego state, the husband is also transformed to the adult ego state as he is convinced, and both husband and wife are transacting in a very complementary manner, and the game is adult ego state to adult ego state. This is another example. Another example can be when two kids are playing, two girls are playing and one girl says that I will act like my mother and you act like my daughter. So, both little girls are working or transacting or playing the game with child ego state. But in all the three examples, the idea is that the two people who are maintaining the communication, they are functioning at the similar or same ego states, which makes the communication or transaction very much complementary. So, in this form of transaction, the communication is complete and both operate from their adult ego state. So, this is one complementary transaction. The other is cross transaction. This transaction seizes or inhibits creativity and free thinking. Why? Because one person is operating with the adult ego state and the other person is operating with the child ego state, and when both the ego states are clashing, then it leads to cross transaction or it can lead to conflict. So, cross transactions may lead to breakdown in communication, which may sometimes be followed by conflict or quarrel. For example, if the manager questions the supervisor that how many units you have assembled, the reply or response from the supervisor can be that how does it matter to you? It is none of your business. I will let you know later on. Now, if the manager also starts communicating at the child ego state, then definitely there will be a conflict, as it is extending from one level of quarrel to the another, because argument is continuing, it is not ceasing. So, this leads to cross transaction. Now, in the diagram also we can say that when the supervisor, that is S, is communicating from adult ego state to the operator, that is with the adult ego state, then it is also expected that the operator or the supervisor will also respond with adult ego state, but it is other way round, that every time the supervisor is operating with the adult ego state or the parent ego state, but actually the supervisor is also transforming his communication from adult to child. So, in any case, whenever in cross transaction, whenever two people are unable to maintain their ego states, then it leads to cross transaction, which actually seizes the communication, which leads to inhibition to creativity and free thinking. So, the idea is that whenever two people in communication fail to maintain their ego states at parallel lines, it actually leads to cross transaction. Now, and again I am coming to the example of this cross transaction, that we will understand that whenever the supervisor is operating with adult ego state, in return the supervisor is also operating with the child ego state. That means, with the dashed arrows, the transaction is becoming crossed. We can observe from S also, from the S responses and O responses, that even in that case, even the operator is also not responding from the parent ego state, but he is operating with the child ego state. So, this is a cross transaction. Next is ulterior transaction. Ulterior transactions are even more complicated, because there is an overt message and a covert message. That means, superficially it is the message is different, but actually the psychological message is very different. That means, the person maintains double standards in their communication, and it becomes difficult for the respondent to understand that what message he or she has received. So, this communication takes simultaneously, that means overt and covert message both are functioning simultaneously, parallel, but the idea is that the overt message is audibly visible. That means, whatever it is being spoken, it is very much being objectified, that this is what the person has spoken, but the underlying psychological message is very different, which is difficult for the person to understand. This actually leads to ulterior transaction. For example, that any person would be highly hospitable to the other person, but the intentions are something else. So, when we are talking about ulterior transaction, it is about the hidden in the intentions which a person fails to understand and does not also admit that what were his hidden intentions. So, in essence, it is a transaction when people say one thing but mean another. We all do it, and we can all recall situations where this was done to us or to others. This is ulterior transaction, and the other is gallows transaction. This is the term coined by Claude Steiner, and this transaction has a very critical nature of communication. For instance, any spinning response to a person's misfortune may serve as a gallows transaction. For example, if something bad has been done or caused to your co-worker, we feel happy and we have a smile on our face, that it is good that something bad has happened to the co-worker. So, this is a gallows transaction. Even the person is expressing regret, but we have a smile on his face, that it is okay, it happens, but with a smile. So, this is a gallows transaction which is inappropriate and reinforces a destructive behavior. That means, the person is happy to hear that the other person is bearing some loss. So, this is gallows transaction. Next comes another component of transaction analysis, that is strokes. So, this I will continue in the next class. Thank you.